Hi everyone. So today I wanted to talk about web services and how we can integrate web services and also RESTful APIs into our Android mobile applications. Uh, so you might be wondering what a web service actually is. So the basic idea of a web service is to expose some information, a database, or a service via a URL to an end user or to an end user application, such as a mobile device. And information can be retrieved by URL with HTTP GET requests. Typically, when you are doing read-only transactions, and you can filter the type of information that you retrieve by manipulating the URL and also by doing other things such as changing the query string parameters so that they have different keys and things like that. So we'll have a look at some examples. The dogs API, for example, that allows us to select. There's a wide variety of different APIs available from the dogs API page, but probably the simplest API here is this one here with the breed, and then you define the name of the breed that you're interested in, and then you can get a random image associated with that dog breed. So there's a nice little drop down here, and that lets us select the breed that we're interested in, and that will change the URL, and then we can get a nice picture of that dog, of that particular dog breed. So we can select any dog breed that we want. So we could get a German Shepherd, for example. And by changing the URL, we're able to change the image, the information that has been retrieved for us by that particular web service. So this is just a publicly available web service. So we can access it in the browser, and so that's one way of accessing the information. The other way of accessing that information is to also use a program. So you can use, if you like a command line program, then you can use something like curl, for example. A program that I like to use that's not relatively nice and simple is Postman. And so I'll just bring this on screen. And so you can enter the URL that you're interested in. You put the string that represents the breed of dog that you're interested in, and then you can define all of the different parameters that you can get. So if we look for a random image for a hound dog, then we can construct this URL here and then send that to the dog's web service. And then we get back a JSON response, which is short for JavaScript Object Notation Language, and that gives us a little message with a status of success and a URL that gives us an image of an Afghan hound dog. So that's another example using the dogs API. There are a lot of publicly available APIs, and you might there's APIs for things like traffic in Auckland. There's APIs for things like weather. There's APIs available for things like restaurant reviews. So typically now When you have a web application or a mobile application, you'll have that application connect to an API, either a publicly available API or your own private API that you've constructed. Today, though, we're just going to look at some simple publicly available APIs. So another interesting API is the Earthquakes API provided by GeoNet. And that allows us to get all sorts of information about different earthquakes. And if you go to GeoNet, they'll give you some information on how the API works and how you can use it. So for example, we'll just scroll up. So there's a little bit of a blurb about the page. You guys can have a look at the web page in your own time. And we can interact with it using the web browser. So if we're interested in earthquakes, we can go to the Quake endpoint. There's some documentation for using the Quake endpoint. And down here, there is a little link. And using the browser option, we can view the JSON information inside of our browser. The actual JSON that you get back is a little bit hard to read, so often it's easier to get the response in a separate program like Postman. So if we try another endpoint, we could try, say, for example, the Quakes endpoint. So that takes as a parameter the MMI. And there's a little example here. So we can look at earthquakes that have an MMI of 3. And that allows us to filter the data for all of those earthquakes that have that MMI value. And from there, we get a list of all of those different earthquakes. And again, it doesn't look that good in the browser. So the best thing to do is to have a look at it from within Postman. And so it's very easy to download Postman. So I won't go into how you download it, but all you need to do is really just copy and paste the URL into a new GET request. And from there, what you can do is send a request to the web service. And then from there, you'll get the information back. And the nice thing about Postman is that it formats the response with this pretty print option. So from there, it's a lot easier to dig out information that you might be interested in, or just visualize the information that you might be interested in, such as where the earthquake occurred, its coordinates, the locality description, all of the time it occurred, the depth, all of that information that you might be interested in. And so later on in the lesson, what we're going to look at is how we can extract this earthquake information and then how we can present it into our application. And so if we're interested in different types of earthquakes with a different MMI value, then what we could do is we can just change this query parameter here. You'll see here that we can either change it in the URL by changing the query string, or we can also just change the query parameter down here. So I'll just change the query parameter here, change my request, that changes the URL. I can send that to the web service, and then I get back a different response. So you can see here we've got all of those earthquakes that have an MMI of 5 or higher. And we still get the same structure of data, but it's for a different MMI value, and we haven't done anything amazing. We've just changed the query string for our URL. So as I say, there's all sorts of different APIs available on the internet. There's APIs for traffic, AT, Auckland Transport. They have APIs for how busy different roads are at different points of time, and you can connect to that and then get that information and pull it into your mobile application or other type of application. There's APIs available from people like NASA, so that you can get a random astronomical picture of the day. So for example, you can send this HTTP GET request to this URL, and then that will send you a response back with some image information in it. One of the interesting things about the NASA API is that you have to provide an API key, and that API key is to track your usage of the API and to make sure that the end user application isn't using the API too much. So when you use these APIs, you need to be a good citizen of the internet and make sure you don't hit the API endpoint too much. A lot of the paid for web services that are available out there, they're mostly set up with an API key that is unique to your account. So when we get into using things like Google Maps in a few weeks' time, we'll look at using API keys that are specific to a specific customer's account in our applications. So that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. I think maybe there's a couple more things with Postman that I wanted to look at. So if we look at the NASA example, then we can send that GET request to the API, and then we can get all of the information about that random astronomical image of the day. So we can get the actual image itself, which we can open up in Postman as well. It's just taking a little bit of time to download. I imagine it's quite a big image. Okay, so here we go. It looks like the file size is 2.73 megabytes, so it took a little bit of time to download. And it looks like the file's mostly black, but you can see here that we've got an asteroid, and that asteroid image that has been downloaded from a database at NASA remotely via this URL. There's obviously some kind of randomization algorithm in the planetary API, random astronomical image API here, and it just picks these random images and gives them to the end user. So that's it from me for the moment. In the next video, we'll look at how to actually hook up your Android application to a web service like the GeoNet API.